and welcome back to part 5 of this crash course on clinical trial coordination and management. In part 5, we're going to be talking about finance and invoicing. Now, if you've watched the previous parts of this crash course, you already know that during the study startup, the site where ideally you work at and then the pharma sponsors have agreed upon and signed a contract or budget. Now, the budget items are where finance and invoicing really comes in. Now, different pharma sponsors can have a different relationship with site and may have a different way of doing this, but typically you can send in invoices and budgets and kind of updates at your own pace, sometimes every few weeks to sometimes every few months. It really depends on the volume of the patients, how many patients you were able to recruit on site, because a lot of the times until you are able to charge back the expenses to the pharma sponsors, it's your site that has to bear the expenses firsthand. So I'm sure most sites prefer doing it pretty frequently, every couple of weeks. I used to do it once a month or every second month. Now, having said that, it's really important as a trial coordinator to know what a budget is. So budget is essentially an agreed upon kind of list where you have various items known as budget items and various agreed upon costs. Now, for example, the cost of administering a drug can be, let's say for an example, $100 every time a patient comes to visit. The cost of PSW services can be $300. The cost of trial coordinator preparing for the visit can be 5 hours at the rate of $70 or $100 an hour. So similarly, these are all budget items. Everything starting from the syringes you use or the pumps you use, the nursing hours, the phlebotomy hours, any kind of pharmacy hours, physician, all of the manpower, as well as all of the tools, the logistics, the tubing for the blood, unless they are providing it to your site, it should be a billable item. Of course, most of these you should, be very on top of your game at the very beginning, at the study startup, but at the level of the visit, once you've had a bunch of visits and you're like, okay, it's been a month or it's been 2 months, it's important that you highlight all the things that were done. Anything that wasn't done should not be billed. For example, maybe your patient had like some kind of a reaction and as such a secondary assessment could not be completed. Maybe you were able to do the drug administration but you couldn't do a follow-up ECG because the patient became too unwell by that point. Of course, the pharma sponsor will by now already be aware of it because by now you should have already filed any kind of protocol deviation reports or any kind of adverse event reports. So when you are billing them, always bill them for only things that were actually done and do not bill them for the budget items that could not be completed for various reasons. Similarly, for logistics, for time and everything, maybe you didn't have a nurse on that particular visit because there was no, actual patient intervention. You just had to go through a few questionnaires with the patient. For that particular visit, don't bill the pharma sponsor for that nursing hour. Having said that, the way you can be very good at your job is being very meticulous about tracking these things. And that's where your documentation again comes into play. Not everybody can remember at every single visit what happened, what didn't happen, which one we missed, which one we did, or, additional resources that were required. So it's important that when the visits are actually happening, you're keeping your notes. So every month or every second month, when you're sitting down to do your invoicing, you're opening up your budget items, maybe you're highlighting everything that has to be charged, making a total. A lot of the time, your site might also charge overhead. Some sites can charge 20%, 30%, 40% overhead, which means the institution has some, general costs of administration and the finance department and stuff. So that usually comes as a percentage of whatever you are charging. So if you are sending over a $5,000 invoice, make sure to add whatever your institutional overhead is. The overhead will not come as a surprise to the pharma sponsor because they will already be aware, having signed the original contract. So the original contract, if you remember, signed at the study startup, was discussed with your institution, with your primary investigator, with the legal team or the contracts office, as well as the finance office. So by now, everybody should be on board when you are sending the invoice. Now, after sending in your invoice, it can take, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on the kind of pharma sponsor to actually get the money. It's important a role as part of a project manager or a clinical trial coordinator to kind of follow up and make sure every invoice you have sent has been approved by them and the money has actually come in and entered your cost center or your account. for that particular study. Similarly, when you are paying out your own vendors, like we had talked about some subcontracts you might have with a certain company to get PSW services, to get transport services, or to do some of your diagnostic tests, you also have to pay them from that same cost center. So it's important that you are also making sure all of the invoices you are supposed to receive, you're receiving them on time, the amounts are matching up to what was agreed upon, the dates are matching up, and then you are authorizing these payments. Maybe you need 2 authorizations, one from the coordinator and then one from the investigator. So being very timely and not letting things kind of sit is very important in this role. Because sometimes you might feel like, oh no, now we have this much extra revenue in our account, and the PI might decide to go and hire more staffing or do some investment projects with that. However, all of a sudden after you have spent that money, you might get like a bunch of invoices you have to pay, or a bunch of overhead that has not yet been deducted. So that's why it's important to really be, as a trial coordinator, be on top of the finances, pay off all your bills in time. A lot of the times people will only bill you once or twice a year. They don't do individual invoicing. They kind of wait maybe every quarter or every 6 months. They're gonna send you all of their costs at once. So it's important to have that on your calendar of your project and say, roughly every April these departments are going to send us bills, so kind of have money put aside for that. Or every November the pharmacy department and the vendors are going to send us the bill. Or every 6 weeks, like, check up and make sure that the bill you have sent to the pharma sponsor has arrived. A lot of the times the pharma sponsor don't even want you to send in budget specific invoices unless it's something out of the ordinary. They might be able to just track you through the EDC, the electronic data capture platform, where you do the data entry, this was done, this wasn't done, this was done, and they will just track it from there, automatically calculate it and deposit it into that account. If you want to be a little extra good in your job, you can always kind of match the amount they have sent versus the calculation you do, and make sure that their calculations are correct and they're not missing out on paying you for anything specific. So that's basically it for finance and invoicing. A lot of institutions won't have you do too much of the hardcore finances. You'll just kind of do overviews and make sure all the invoices make sense, and then the finance person in the finance department will take care of these things, or a senior manager will take care of them. But it's important to just be very clear about what items, at least what budget items have been completed that you're expecting revenue for, and what vendors you are paying out. At least be clear on that part as a clinical trial coordinator. So that was it for number 5 in finance and invoicing.